Have you ever felt like you've really got a handle on your inner world? That you understand why you think, feel, and act the way you do?
Yeah.
It's a comforting thought, isn't it?
Mhm.
As if we've built our own unique, watertight system to make sense of everything. But what if there's far more to our inner landscape, to the very structure of our soul, than we consciously perceive?
Yeah, what if there's this whole hidden dimension?
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into the profound insights of Carl Gustav Jung, specifically his groundbreaking work on the structure of the soul.
A fascinating topic.
It really is. Our mission here is to unpack Jung's unique perspective as a practical psychologist, someone whose actual job day in and day out was helping people navigate truly chaotic psychic states.
Not just theory, but practice.
Right. We'll explore his understanding of consciousness, the personal unconscious, and maybe most fascinatingly, the collective unconscious. And we'll see how these layers profoundly shape our experiences, our beliefs, even our understanding of reality itself.
Expect some surprising connections, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. Get ready for some surprising facts and aha moments extracted directly from his own observations and case studies. All our insights today come straight from Jung's original writings on this very topic, offering us a direct line to his brilliant mind.
Straight from the source.
Okay, so let's get into it. Jung begins by telling us that the soul is incredibly complex, almost like, a reflection of the world itself. So complex that we can only truly observe it from specific angles.
He's very clear about his role, isn't he?
He is. He explicitly states he doesn't see himself as a metaphysician or a laboratory psychologist.
Well,
Instead, he's a practical psychologist. He even uses the analogy of a surgeon, focused on finding a way out of these complicated psychic states.
which means his goal isn't just abstract understanding. It's about understanding these complex conditions and then expressing them in, as he puts it, accessible language.
Accessible language, yeah, using simple schemes that resonate universally and, well, actually help his patients.
What's truly insightful here is Jung's emphasis on the practical application. He's not just theorizing in an ivory tower. He's trying to alleviate real suffering, help actual individuals.
Right.
Which makes you wonder, how does someone like that even begin to categorize something as intricate, as, well, slippery as the contents of consciousness?
Where do you even start?
He starts with an ancient philosophical rule, basically. There is nothing in the intellect that has not been previously impredicate in the sense. We perceive the world through our senses. We see, hear, touch, smell.
The raw input.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But just sensing isn't enough to grasp what something is. That's the job of apperception.
Our perception. Okay, so for Jung, that isn't just basic sensation,
Right.
right? It's more complex.
And much more. It's the highly complex psychic process of not just seeing something, but understanding it, assimilating that perception into our existing mental framework, giving it meaning. It's the step beyond just raw sensory data.
Got it. So beyond that raw input and this apperception, Jung identifies several key psychic processes. First up, there's thought.
Think.
This is the process of recognition, comparison, differentiation, all using memory. He gives a great example. You hear a peculiar noise.
Yeah, the heating pipes one.
That's the one. Your thought process kicks in, connects it to memory, and you realize, oh, it's just air bubbles in the central heating. Thought is what tells us what the thing is.
And distinct from thought, very importantly, there's feeling.
Okay, how's that different?
Feeling involves what he calls an affective tone. It's about evaluating an object. Is it pleasant, desirable, ugly, repulsive?
Ah, the value judgment.
Exactly. So seeing a fire, for instance, doesn't just register as heat and light. It can provoke immediate emotional reactions, comfort, fear, attraction, whatever. It brings these powerful affective tones. It's that instant gut level evaluation.
Okay, thought tells us what, feeling tells us how we feel about it. Makes sense.
Well-
Then he talks about intuition, which sounds different again.
Very different and crucial for Jung. He defines it as the perception of the possibilities inherent in a given situation.
Possibilities.
Right.
So not what is, but what could be.
Precisely. He notes how language often confuses it with seeing or thinking or feeling, especially in German, apparently.
right.
But he stresses its distinctness. It's a basic function of the soul. It's not just a hunch or quick thinking. It's more like a direct grasping of potential.
Interesting, like seeing the hidden potential in something.
Kind of, yeah. And he also briefly touches on volitional and instinctive processes. Volitional ones are, directed impulses linked to what we think of as free will, things we consciously choose.
Like deciding to pick up a cup.
Right. Instinctive processes, though, they originate in the unconscious or directly in the body. They feel compulsive, not free, Think primal drives.
Yeah.
These often operate outside our conscious control, highlighting the raw, non-rational forces Jung saw constantly at play.
Challenging that idea that we're fully in charge.
Definitely. And finally, Jung distinguishes between directed and undirected processes. Directed ones are rational, like focusing your attention.
Paying attention right now.
Hopefully. Undirected processes are irrational fantasies, daydreams, and crucially, dreams themselves.
Ah, dreams. He puts them in their own category.
He does. The seventh category of conscious content. They resemble fantasies, being irrational and undirected, but their causes and aims are initially obscure, unknown. He gives dreams this status because they are, for him, the most important and clearest evidence of unconscious psychic processes breaking through into our conscious awareness.
Okay, so pulling this together, Jung is basically saying that if we only look at consciousness, we're missing a huge part of the picture.
Exactly. He argues that restricting the psyche just to consciousness simply isn't sufficient. He's showing us there's this whole other realm, an unconscious soul, whose existence we can access indirectly, even if we can't, shine a light right on it.
We can see its effects.
We can definitely see its effects. And zooming out a bit, Jung provides some really compelling evidence that people can perceive, think, feel, remember, and even act unconsciously, behaving as if they have ideas they aren't consciously aware of at all.
Like how? What kind of evidence?
Well, he points to examples from hypnotism and sleepwalking, for instance. He talks about a hysterically deaf patient who would sing. And when the doctor subtly changed the key on the piano while she was singing, the patient immediately continued singing in the new key.
Even though she couldn't consciously hear the piano.
Exactly. Her unconscious clearly perceived the change. Another case involved a patient with tubular vision, meaning she could only see straight ahead, blind in the periphery. She suffered these hysteroepileptic convulsions whenever light shone in her blind spot, acting as if she saw the flame, even though consciously she couldn't.
Wow. So the body, or the unconscious, is reacting even when the conscious mind isn't registering it.
Precisely. These demonstrate actions occurring regardless of whether consciousness understand or not, as Jung puts it. The unconscious is clearly perceiving and reacting.
So Jung saw these unconscious actions as solid proof of a psyche operating beyond our conscious control, even in everyday life, not just in extreme cases.
Absolutely. And it's not just about these pathological states or hypnosis. We see evidence for the unconscious in what Freud famously called the psychopathology of everyday life.
Slips of the tongue, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Slips of the tongue or pen. Those moments where our unconscious actions seem to betray hidden intentions. Jung mentions the old proverb, lingua lapsa virum dicit. A slip of the tongue speaks the truth.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. These everyday blunders really highlight how unconscious processes often frustrate our conscious intentions, sometimes quite revealingly.
Fascinating. And then, of course, you have more severe conditions.
Definitely. In pathological states like hysteria, compulsive neuroses, phobias, schizophrenia, Jung argues that almost all the symptoms have their roots in unconscious psychic activity.
So the unconscious is driving the symptoms.
Largely, yes. And then there are dreams again. Jung tells this incredible story of an accountant.
Oh yeah, the fraud case.
That's the one. He was completely stumped trying to unravel this complex fraudulent bankruptcy. Worked late, went to sleep exhausted. Then, around 3 a.m., his wife sees him get up, go to his office, write furiously, and go back to bed.
And he didn't remember any of it.
Not a thing the next morning. But he found a series of notes in his own handwriting that completely laid out the solution, clarifying the whole complex case.
Incredible. The unconscious did the work while he slept.
It seems so. Dreams, while we experience them consciously, clearly bring previously unconscious material right into our awareness, proving its existence and its power.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you mentioned Jung asks an even stranger question.
Yeah, this is where it gets really deep. He takes us a step further and asks this truly paradoxical question. Does the unconscious have dreams too?
Wait, the unconscious having dreams, what does that even mean? Deeper layers.
Exactly. Are there even deeper, more fundamentally unconscious processes at play beneath the personal stuff? And he doesn't just leave it as a philosophical question. He answers with a really compelling clinical example.
Okay, I need to hear this.
It's a vivid illustration of how the unconscious operates, potentially beyond even our personal experiences. Let's unpack the story of the 27-year-old officer.
The one with the heart and heel pain.
That's him. He suffered from these violent attacks of pain in his heart region described like a cake inside, and also these piercing pains in his left heel. Organically, doctors found nothing wrong.
And it started after a breakup.
Yes. His attacks began right after his girlfriend broke up with him. Now, consciously, he dismissed it. Total bravado. Said things like, oh, the stupid woman. If she doesn't want me, I'll find someone else. A man like me won't let himself be put down by something like this. That was his conscious take.
Pride talking.
Big time. Big time. His conscious pride wouldn't let him feel the heartache as, actual soul pain. And interestingly, after he finally had a bit of a cry, the heartache and that cake in the throat feeling.
The globus hystericus.
Right, that sensation of a lump in the throat, often linked to suppressed emotion, that disappeared. Jung explained it as basically swallowed tears, a direct result of him repressing his emotions. So those symptoms were understandable given his conscious attitude.
Okay, so the heart pain made sense in a way once you understood the repression, but what about the heel?
Ah, the heel pain. That was the mystery. It didn't disappear, and it just didn't fit any rational picture of heartbreak. I mean, who expresses heartache through their heel?
Right. It seems totally unrelated.
Completely. So, and since consciousness offered no clue, Jung, as he often did, turned to the patient's dreams.
What did he dream?
The patient had a dream. He dreamt he was bitten in the heel by a large snake and immediately became paralyzed.
Bitten by a snake in the heel.
Exactly. And for Jung, this dream was the key. His heel hurt because he had been bitten by a snake, symbolically speaking.
Symbolically, okay. But where does that symbolism come from?
This is where Jung makes a truly profound connection. He links the snake bite to ancient archetypal imagery. He immediately thought of the Genesis verse.
From the Bible, okay.
She, Eve woman, will crush your head, and you, the serpent, will bruise her heel.
Wow, okay, the heel connection is right there.
It is. But Jung goes even further back. He mentions an even older Egyptian hymn, one recited to cure snake bites, which describes the god Horus being stung in the heel by a noble worm, a kind of serpent formed by his mother Isis.
Ancient Egypt, so this isn't just biblical.
Not at all. And crucially, Jung notes the patient had minimal conscious knowledge of the Bible and certainly zero awareness of obscure ancient Egyptian hymns.
So he couldn't have just, remembered it somehow.
Highly unlikely. Jung argues this suggests something much deeper than personal memory or forgotten learning, what he called cryptomnesia.
Okay, so if it's not personal memory, what is it?
Jung argues this kind of symbolic metaphorical expression corresponds to what he called the primitive mentality, a way of thinking found in ancient cultures, and supposedly deep within us all, that uses analogies and symbols, not abstract logic.
Like a more ancient layer of the mind?
Exactly. He says this venerable antiquity is so foreign to the modern individual's conscious mind that the snake dream reveals a fragment of that psychic activity which no longer has anything to do with modern individuality of the dreamer.
Wow.
And this is what leads him to name this phenomenon a supra-individual psychic activity, a collective unconscious.
The collective unconscious. So it's like a shared pool of ancient symbols and ways of thinking.
That's the idea. He even links this to the concept of magic by analogy, common on ancient healing practices where the symptom itself might be seen as part of the cure, working through symbolic links. And he shows this isn't just some dusty ancient superstition by drawing parallels to the use of sicut, meaning like or as if, in the Latin text of the Christian Mass, like the blessing of the sacred fire at Easter Vigil.
How does that connect?
Well, the fire struck from flint is explicitly analogized to Christ as the cornerstone. Jung argues this kind of symbolic, analogical thinking touches those immemorial forms of the human spirit, showing its persistence.
Okay, that officer example is pretty compelling. But Jung wanted more proof, right? Something even harder to explain away.
He did. He was a scientist at heart, always looking for rigorous proof. He insisted on finding evidence for this collective unconscious, where the mythological symbolism couldn't possibly be explained by common language, cultural transmission, or that idea of cryptomnesia, forgotten memory. He needed a watertight case.
Which makes you wonder, how do you prove something that is, by definition, beyond individual experience? That seems like a huge challenge.
It is. And Jung provides this truly unique, almost startling example that, for him, really cemented the theory. It involves a schizophrenic patient.
Okay, tell me about this one.
He describes a patient, a clerk in his 30s, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia who'd been ill since his early 20s. Back in 1906, this patient shared a hallucination he'd had.
A hallucination?
Yes. He said if he blinked rapidly while looking at the sun through a window, he could see the sun's penis.
The sun's penis? Okay, that's unusual.
Definitely. And he added that if he moved his head from side to side, he saw the sun's penis move too, and that was the origin of the wind.
Wow. Okay. A very specific, very strange vision. Where does the proof come in?
Here's the amazing part. 4 years later, in 1910, Jung was reading a book by Albrecht Dietrich, a renowned philologist. The book included a translation of a Greek text, part of what's called the Magical Papyrus of Paris, which contained a liturgy from an ancient Mithraic cult.
A Mithraic occult, like ancient Roman mystery religion.
Exactly. And this ancient text described a vision. In the vision, the initiate would see a tube hanging down from the disk of the sun. And the text explicitly stated that when this tube swung towards the west, an infinite wind blew from it.
Wait, a tube hanging from the sun, the origin of the wind.
Precisely. The parallel is absolutely astounding.
It really is. A hallucination in 1906 from an institutionalized patient, and an ancient Greek text describing basically the same image, published only in 1910.
The timing is crucial. Jung emphasizes the separation in time, 1906 for the vision, 1910 for the publication of Dietrich's book containing the translation.
Yeah.
This effectively rules out any possibility that the patient had somehow read about it and forgotten, cryptomnesia, or that there was some kind of telepathic transmission.
It couldn't be just coincidence.
Jung argues strongly against it. He says this was no casual resemblance, and he digs even deeper. He connects this tube, or olus, a Greek word that can mean a wind instrument, but also a tube or even a gush of blood.
Okay.
He connects this to imagery found in medieval paintings of the Annunciation. Sometimes you see a kind of tube or hose pipe extending from heaven down towards Mary's robes as the Holy Spirit descends, often as a dove.
Huh. I think I've seen images like that.
And the Holy Spirit, Jung notes, has anciently been represented or described as a rushing wind. Plus, the philosophical idea that the Spirit descends through the circle of the sun is quite common in both classical and medieval thought.
So the sun, a tube, wind, spirit, it's all interconnected in this symbolic language.
It seems to be. Jung concludes he couldn't find anything casual in these visions. He saw it instead as the resurgence of possibilities, of ideas that have always existed and that can be discovered again in the most diverse minds and times.
Ideas that aren't learned or passed down culturally.
Exactly. And are therefore not inherited ideas, he stresses. This concrete example, this specific bizarre image appearing independently across centuries, offered him tangible insight into that deeper psychic activity, which is the collective unconscious.
Wow. Okay, that is a powerful piece of evidence. So what are the implications of all this? If this collective unconscious exists, how does it fit with, regular consciousness and the personal stuff we forget?
Well, Jung essentially gives us a framework, a map of the psyche with 3 distinct levels. It helps to visualize it almost.
Like layers.
Exactly like layers. It's a grand, multi-layered map of the soul, you could say. So first, right at the surface, we have consciousness.
The part we know.
The part we're aware of, yeah. It's the ephemeral part dealing with the facts of the moment. Its main job is adaptation and orientation in the immediate world, like, navigating physical space, dealing with what's right in front of us.
Okay, level 1, consciousness. What's next?
Level 2 is the personal unconscious. This layer contains stuff that was once conscious but maybe lost its intensity, got forgotten, or was actively repressed because it was uncomfortable.
Like memories or feelings we pushed away.
Exactly. And it also holds weak sensory perceptions, things that happened around us, but never quite reached the threshold of full conscious awareness, stuff we registered subliminally, perhaps.
Okay, personal forgotten stuff. And then the deepest layer.
Then the most profound layer, the collective unconscious. This is the big one. Jung describes it as an immemorial heritage of possibilities of representation.
Possibilities of representation, like blueprints for images or ideas.
Sort of. Innate patterns. And crucially, he says it's not individual but common to all men and even to all animals. It is, in Jung's view, the true basis of the individual's psyche, the foundation everything else is built on.
Common to all humans, maybe even animals. That's a huge idea, a shared psychic inheritance.
Well, it is huge. He uses an analogy to the body to explain it. Just like our physical bodies share universal traits, basic structure, organs that connect us way back, even to protozoa.
Right. We all have hearts, lungs.
The collective unconscious is a shared spiritual heritage, born again in the brain structure of every human being. It's innate, not learned.
Wow. Born again in every brain. So how does this collective unconscious manifest? How does it affect us?
Well, just as our physical body adapts to the environment over millennia, Jung argues our soul does too. Consciousness reacts to the present moment, to the immediate environment, but the collective unconscious reacts to universal and permanent conditions, things that humans have always experienced, whether they're psychological, physiological, or physical realities.
Like the sun rising every day, or feeling fear.
Exactly. And this is where we see the collective unconscious truly express itself. Jung famously stated that all mythology would be a kind of projection of the collective unconscious.
Mythology, like Greek myths, folk tales.
Yes. Think about the starry sky. Ancient people saw those chaotic points of light and projected images onto them, organizing them into constellations, into stories. Jung even suggested the supposed influences of stars in astrology might actually be unconscious introspective perceptions of the collective unconscious's activity projected outwards.
Huh. Projecting inner patterns onto the outer world.
Precisely. He gives incredible examples from physical phenomena, too. Take the daily course of the sun.
Okay, sunrise, sunset.
It's reflected in the psyche, he says, as this vast mythical conglomeration found across cultures. A divine hero, born from the sea at dawn, climbing a heavenly chariot, being devoured by a great mother figure the night or the sea at sunset, maybe crossing the underworld or the midnight sea in a dragon's belly, and then being reborn the next morning.
We see that pattern everywhere in hero myths.
We do. And Jung clarifies this isn't primitive man trying to do physics, trying to explain the sun scientifically. It's about recording the emotional fantasies, the deep psychic responses prompted by this powerful universal experience.
It's about the feeling it evokes.
Yes. He shares this amazing anecdote from his time with the Ogonis tribe in East Africa. They told him the rising sun was God. But when the sun was high in the sky at noon, they said, that is not God. And when it was setting, that is God again.
So only at the transition points.
Right. Because, as Jung puts it, their emotion tells them much more than physics. For them, the experience of sunrise, the feeling of darkness ending in liberation, was the divine event. Same for sunset and the feeling of ending. It wasn't about the physical sun itself being God all day. It was about the psychic impact. He called this deep emotional connection participation mystique.
Wow. That makes sense. What about other phenomena? The moon.
Lunar myths also reflect this. The moon changeable, associated with night, often linked symbolically with women's cycles, with sleep, sometimes seen as a disturber of sleep, or even a receptacle for departed souls. And think about the connection to madness, lunacy.
Right, the word itself.
It all stems from the psychic resonance, the fantasies projected onto the moon, natural disasters too. Jung recalls experiencing a violent earthquake himself. His immediate instinctive feeling wasn't geological analysis, it was feeling like he was on the skin of a gigantic animal that shook under my feet.
A primal image.
Very primal. Storms become angry gods. Again, it's not objective reporting. It's the psyche translating powerful external events into these affect-laden fantasies, using these ancient patterns.
And it extends beyond physical nature to our own bodies.
Absolutely. Basic physiological drives get projected too. Sexuality, he notes, appears mythologically as fertility gods, as sensual demons like incubi and succubi, sometimes as the devil, or often as a powerful, ambivalent serpent figure.
The serpent again.
It pops up everywhere. Hunger, too, can turn food itself into gods. He mentions Mexican tribes who literally gave their gods vacations so they could regenerate. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs described as eaters of the gods, Osiris identified with wheat, the bull killed by Mithras, symbolizing life-giving food and fertility.
So our basic drives get personified, mythologized.
Yes. And importantly, so do common psychological conditions or situations. Repeated experiences of danger, whether physical danger to the body or psychic danger to the soul, especially if they occur in typical forms, provoke fantasies loaded with affection. And these fantasies give rise to archetypes.
Archetypes. That's the key term, isn't it?
It's the general name Jung gave to these recurring mythical themes, these inherited patterns of representation. Think of dragons guarding dangerous passages or treasures.
Classic.
Or jinns haunting deserts, spirits of the dead lurking in spooky places like bamboo forests, water spirits like undines or serpents in deep water. Powerful spirits attributed to powerful people like kings or medicine men. Even disease and death often being seen as caused by spirits or witches. These are all archetypal responses to recurring human situations.
Situations of danger or the unknown.
Exactly. But it's not just about danger. Even the most common everyday human realities like husband, wife, father, mother, child generate incredibly powerful archetypes whose activity, Jung says, is recognizable everywhere, in myths, in dreams, in art, even today in our own lives.
The mother archetype, the hero archetype.
Those are prime examples. And here's another really surprising connection Jung makes. He shows how even complex religious doctrines, like Christian dogmas, can be understood as highly developed expressions of these fundamental archetypes.
Christian dogmas, how so?
Well, think of the Trinity. He relates it to archetypal structures, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, often having feminine connotations, like Sophia, wisdom, which he suggests was later somewhat substituted by the intense veneration of Mary,
Interesting.
or the idea of Christ as the bridegroom and the church as his bride. The baptismal font being called the womb of the church, the blessed water compared to amniotic fluid.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
He even points to the ritual of the sacred wedding, or hierogam, in the Easter Vigil ceremony. A large candle, representing Christ and seen as a phallic symbol, is immersed 3 times into the baptismal font to symbolically fertilize the water, making it capable of spiritual rebirth.
That's quite explicit symbolism.
It is. And titles like the Pope being the Pontifex Maximus, greatest bridge builder in ancient Roman title, or the Church being the Magna Mater, Great Mother, with believers positioned as children in need of help. Jung sees all these as the sedimentation of all the powerful ancestral experiences of all humanity. They're rich with deep emotion and powerful ancient images shaping religious life and even sometimes political structures.
That's a really radical way to look at religion as emerging from these deep psychic patterns.
It is radical, but for Jung, it wasn't about debunking religion. He asserts that a rational understanding of these archetypal unconscious forces doesn't diminish their value or power. On the contrary, he believed it helps us understand their immense importance and how deeply they shape us.
Okay, so understanding the archetypal roots doesn't make them less real or meaningful.
Not at all. It actually highlights their reality as psychic forces.
Yeah.
Which, makes you wonder, how does our modern, often very rational consciousness relate to these powerful ancient currents swimming beneath the surface?
Yeah, how does that play out today?
Well, Jung offers an interesting comparison. He suggests that a devout Catholic, through belief in things like the Holy Sacrament, experiences a considerable part of his collective unconscious, made tangible, real, present in the ritual and dogma. God's presence is always there, symbolically accessible.
Okay, the archetypes are sort of contained and expressed within the religious structure.
Right. Whereas Protestants and Jews, he argues, having let go of some of that specific dogmatic and ritualistic structure, must consciously look for or grapple with these things more directly, as the archetypes remain more deeply immersed, less explicitly formulated, within their unconscious.
So different ways of relating to the same underlying forces.
Potentially, yes. It highlights how different cultural and religious forms mediate our relationship with this deeper layer. And this is crucial. For Jung, the unconscious isn't just some dusty attic full of gigantic historical prejudice or abandoned wreckage from the past.
It's not just old stuff.
No. He describes it as a living system of reactions and aptitudes. It's the source of instincts, yes, but also the wellspring of all that is creative in the human psyche. It influences our individual lives constantly through invisible paths, making it all the more effective because we're often unaware of it.
So it's active, alive, and creative.
Very much so. He suggests that the fundamental split, the dissociation of consciousness from the unconscious, which he sometimes symbolizes using the myth of the fall of the angels, created this enduring human problem. How do we adapt to these powerful, invisible determinants within us?
And we're still grappling with that.
Absolutely. Despite our modern Enlightenment conception, despite the incredulous laughter that often greets the idea of unconscious powers or spirits, Jung points out that millions of people still believe in concepts like mana, the diffuse, impersonal supernatural power found in many indigenous cultures, or in spirits. He mentions movements like Christian Science or spiritualism as modern examples. The fundamental problem of relating to the unconscious, he says, remains as alive as ever.
So ignoring it doesn't make it go away.
Not in the slightest. Ultimately, Jung sees the collective unconscious as the formidable spiritual heritage of the development of humanity that is born again in the brain structure of every human being.
That phrase again, born again in the brain structure, it's innate.
It's innate. While consciousness is this relatively recent, ephemeral phenomenon, busy with moment-to-moment adaptations, the unconscious is the deep, ancient foundation. It's the source of all the instinctive forces of the psyche, and contains the forms or categories that regulate them, which are precisely the archetypes.
The archetypes provide the structure for our instincts and experiences.
Exactly. And this means that all of humanity's most powerful ideas, whether they're religious, scientific, philosophic, or moral, can ultimately be traced back to these fundamental archetypes. Our conscious mind then takes these primordial forms and uses them to creatively translate the external world and our inner world into the visible, understandable reality we experience.
Wow, okay. We have definitely taken a deep dive today into Jung's map of the soul. Peeling back those layers from the surface consciousness through the personal unconscious right down to that deep shared collective unconscious.
Hmm.
We've seen how things like ancient myths, very personal symptoms like the officer's heel pain, and even grand religious dogmas can be understood as expressions of this profound shared psychic inheritance.
It really reveals that the human psyche is just far richer, far more mysterious,
No.
and deeply interconnected than we often realize, doesn't it?
It really does.
It encourages us, I think, to look beyond just the surface of our experiences, both our personal ones and the collective ones we see in culture, and to maybe appreciate these enduring ancient patterns that really shape who we are.
Absolutely. So thinking about all this, what stands out to you listening right now? Maybe consider for a moment the dreams you've had recently, or those strong feelings that sometimes arise, seemingly out of nowhere. Or think about the universal stories, myths, movies, books that resonate really deeply within you. Could these be perhaps whispers from those immemorial forms of the human spirit that Jung describes? Could they be a direct connection, however faint, to that collective unconscious that potentially unites us all, and if so? What does that mean for how you understand yourself and maybe how you understand the world around you?